If you're into fashion trends and are on social media, you've probably seen content on how to find a dupe of an expensive item at a significantly lower price. There's always been a drive for shoppers to find a deal or get something at a discounted price, but lately it seems like duping has become an entire industry of its own. With the rise of influencers, consumerism, and the insatiable desire for affordable luxury, is fast fashion getting out of hand? Before there were magazine articles about how to find a cheaper version of an expensive look, or influencers posting links for dupes of designer products, there was an industry of skilled artists for hire that could mimic a luxury item at a fraction of the price. In the mid-1800s, as couture fashion designers were making waves in the industry, a smaller industry of counterfeit designs was beginning to gain traction. Designers would often see extremely similar versions of their creations and didn't have many options to stop it from happening, which inspired them to authenticate their designs with a signed label. In 1923, French designer Madeleine Vionnet began using her thumbprint to authenticate her label and protect her unique designs from being copied. There were artists whose sole job was to discreetly draw up designs they saw on runways, with the goal of mimicking those designs. That was pretty much legal back then, and still is to this day. Counterfeit items, by their very nature, infringe upon intellectual property rights.
So intellectual property is a set of legal rules that protect innovations of various sorts.
That's Christopher Sprigman, a lawyer and professor at NYU Law that has studied intellectual property rights for years.
In the fashion industry, the most relevant form of intellectual property is trademark, and trademark applies. So in other words, you can't copy the Nike swoosh or the Louis Vuitton logo and put it on your product if it confuses consumers. If it confuses consumers about the source of the product and they think it's coming from Nike or from Louis Vuitton in my example, that's a trademark infringement. What is interesting about the fashion industry is that copyright is mostly absent. And why is that? Because apparel, the courts have said, is a useful article. That is, apparel covers you, it keeps you warm, and copyright doesn't protect useful things. Patent protects useful things. Patent only applies to novel inventions. Fashion typically isn't a novel invention because, clothes have been around forever. Human body hasn't changed very much. And so it's very difficult to get any kind of a patent, even a design patent for most apparel. Copyright rarely applies. And so what we have, at least in the United States, in the fashion industry, is a relative freedom to copy.
In the past few years, social media has impacted shopping habits, especially for younger consumers on apps like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube through a trend called duping.
Dupe culture is this sort of culture, particularly present on social media, that is all about finding copies of more expensive products at a lower cost.
That's Beck Oakes. She's a journalist who has written about dupe culture and Gen Z shopping habits.
A lot of the demographic that you're seeing on these apps are younger. We don't have the money to spend on the expensive original designs, so we tend to go for a cheaper alternative instead. The main factors that sort of contribute to the rise of dupes and the rise of their popularity is, one, with the speed at which trends move. It's no longer having to go on Vogue.com or buying Vogue magazine. We're seeing these trends so much quicker. So we're getting in on these trends so much quicker. And I think a lot of fast fashion brands are capitalizing off that. Wouldn't you rather spend $25 on it as opposed to $100? And on top of that, with primarily the audience of the likes of TikTok being younger generations and entering a lot of us into a difficult job market with the pandemic, we don't have the money to always spend on expensive items, especially if they're not going to be trending in a few months' time.
In addition to trends moving at a faster rate, the fashion industry has seen rapid growth. Clothing production doubled between 2000 and 2014, and as a result, people bought 60% more garments in that same period. They also only kept the clothes for half as long. According to the Climate Council, the fashion industry produces 1.2 billion metric tons of CO2 each year. In 2018, the fashion industry resulted in more greenhouse gas emissions than the carbon produced by France, Germany, and the UK combined. The overproduction and overconsumption of clothing has numerous consequences, especially for the environment and the people working for these companies.
The more and more we go down the normalization of dupes and the normalization of these brands that create them, the ethical conditions for workers is just going to get worse and worse, because when you buy a dupe of a more expensive product, you have to think, how is that brand making a profit? Because they're not going to be able to do it whilst paying the worker fairly for making it.
As consumers grow more aware of the problems with the fashion industry, there needs to be some accountability on where we choose to spend our money.
I think the better approach when it comes to perhaps encouraging people away from buying dupes is to educate people on the practices behind making these products. There are creators out there and brand owners of ethical companies who break down every single penny that goes into why their clothes are priced the way they are, from the taxes to the fabrics they use to paying their workers a fair wage.
In a world dominated by influencers, overproduction of goods, and the allure of affordable luxury, the ethical considerations surrounding the purchase of counterfeit items are complex and multifaceted. The act of buying dupe clothing products touches on intellectual property rights, economic systems, and individual values. As consumers, we are presented with a choice that extends beyond the transaction itself. It is a choice that shapes the world we live in. Ultimately, the decision to purchase counterfeit items should be made with careful consideration of its ethical implications, recognizing the broader impact on innovation, economies, and the values we hold dear.